And I'm thinking, I interviewed Temple Grandin, and so I'm going to talk about some of the things she said here in a moment. But are you hypothesizing perhaps as a unifying rubric that the autistic condition is characterized by a relative inability to infer a uniting, it's like a uniting narrative or a uniting concept? Because what you implied was that if I'm watching your face, which is changing, unlike the background, let's say, which is very stable, that the reason that doesn't trigger anomaly detection anxiety in me is because I understand the thread of our conversation, and that thread is a unifying reference point, and I can assume that all the manifestations of your differences are a variation of that single thing. So Temple Grandin told me that she can't, or she had real difficulty abstracting in a very particular way. So she said, for example, and you see this with some autistic drawings, she can't bring to mind a generic church. You know how children draw a house with a triangle for the roof and a square for the house and a door and two windows? That no house looks like that.
Sure.
But all houses are like that, right? It's more like a hieroglyphic or an abstraction. The same with those stick figures, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of quasi-linguistic abstractions. And it also sheds some light on maybe the hyperreactivity to novelty that is characteristic of the systematizer, because one of the potential pitfalls of paying attention to detail would be sensitivity to variation in detail. Whereas if your proclivity is to perceive higher up the abstraction chain, those differences are going to vanish in the generalization.
Yeah, but as soon as you move to the general, you're going to lose a lot of information.
Right, of course. But that's part of the advantage of moving to the general.
Yeah, so if I call them hypersystemizers, a hypersystemizer, which may characterize some or many autistic people, they care more about the particular system in front of them to understand this particular system. So what would be an example? So let's say that the child is building a tower out of Lego bricks. Many autistic kids love Lego, and and they often focus for long periods. Sometimes it's called obsessions, but I think that's a kind of pejorative way of describing what they're doing. They're locked into the detail of how do all the bricks fit together and what they're trying to build. But they may not be looking at other children's faces in the room, or at adults who are trying to interact with them, because they're so focused on the system that they're trying to build. They're not trying to think of what are all the different possible systems I could build. They're just trying to build this particular system. Once they've done that, they may then, under their own control, make a change to the system. So it's not that they're averse to all change, but they want change to be under their control. And I guess what's challenging for autistic kids, or for a systemizer, a strong systemizer, is in the social world, in the playground, for example, you've got kids running around, you've got lots of people talking to you at once. There are, some of the verbal communication may not be literal, so you're trying to track the meaning of words when someone's using sarcasm or using metaphor or other kinds of figurative language. You've got not just focusing one-to-one. Like in our conversation, it's a little bit easier because it's one-to-one. But imagine if we were in the pub and there are 6 people talking at once, and you're trying to keep track of what does one person think about what someone else has just said or what someone else is thinking. So it's these multiple levels of employing a theory of mind in real time and being expected to react with a socially appropriate response. All of that is too many moving parts. Whereas taking apart a transistor radio and putting it back together again, or taking apart, I'm going to use kind of a nice domestic example. Imagine a 3-year-old child who takes the toaster in the kitchen, takes it apart to understand what is what happens inside when I push the lever down and when the lever comes up and the toast pops out. That's a child who's going to be a future engineer, a future systemizer. And I think for a long time, because I've been working in the field of autism for 40 years, in the bad old days, we would have tried to discourage autistic kids and autistic people from their repetitive behavior, sometimes called obsessional behavior. We thought that was bad for them because they're never going to learn about the real world if all they do for hours and hours is take the toaster apart and put it back together again. But actually, that's their learning style for many autistic kids. And if we see that not as a bad thing, but as a good thing, that they take a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and they want to put it together again in a complete way to understand how every piece fits into the whole. You hear of these anecdotes of autistic kids who can do that, maybe not even using the picture on the sort of the right side of the jigsaw puzzle. They can do it face down. So they're using the shape and understanding how every shape locks in a unique way with every other shape. But they can do this very rapidly. So it's kind of, we should focus on the strengths of autistic people. And, that could then become their stepping stone into flourishing in education and flourishing in the place of work. But if we're expecting all kids to be hypersocial, checking each other's faces, checking each other's relationships and body language and reading between the lines, picking up hints, autistic kids may appear to be struggling. Whereas if we focus on their strengths, we can say, well, this kid's got a gift. Let's not worry about whether the child is making eye contact or not. Let's just let the child learn in their own way and see how far they can go. And, parents who recognize their child's autism as it's neurodivergence, that we don't have to expect all kids to learn the same way, to process information in the same way. Just let the kid follow what they're interested in. Those kids might decide, I want to do mathematics all day. And sure enough, they end up in university and they're on the fast track into advanced mathematics, even if along the way they haven't really managed to learn how to write an essay with a beginning, a middle, and an end, which communicates to a reader, because that's not their interest. Their interest is how numbers fit together, just like how pieces of the jigsaw fit together.